Fans of the Horus Heresy, thank you very much for joining me for an episode of Spleen Vent. So, Spleen Vent is about the Coronis Grav Carrier, or certainly my copy of the Coronis Grav Carrier. So, what I've got here is a kit, which is a brand new release kit, and it's got a load of faults. And I'm a little bit ticked off about this one, to be honest. And so what I've done is I filmed the first portion of this last night before I returned some parts, which I've done today. I found out more today, so I'm going to film another section and tack it onto the end of this to complete the story, so to speak, so far. So yes, let's start off with the story of the booms. Fans of the Horus Heresy, thank you very much for joining me for an update video on the Coronis Grav Carrier by Forge World. So, oh dear, poor Coronis. Right, after much faffing around, I managed to get the hull together, and I've done all the filling on it. This looks pretty dreadful at the moment, and that's because it's curing, and all this is going to need cutting and smoothing and sanding to get a fine finish. But with a few more hours work, this will actually look really good. So, a lot of time required, but happy with that. What I'm not happy with, however, is the fit of the engine assemblies on the nacelles. So let me show you the instruction manual to explain what I'm on about. Right, so this is a nacelle, and there's a front view, this is a rear. And what we have is we have an engine plate that's going to attach into this empty space. And this is clever design because this actually covers the production key. Yeah, so that actually masks one of the kind of bad finish areas of models. So I like that, and I've seen this used on the Macro Carrier and other models. And then you've got these kind of blocks which are going to serve as attachment points for these jet exhausts. You can see that there's an overlap one that's going to line up with one there, and then this engine is going to attach there. So that's what's supposed to be happening here. Right, let me show you what is actually happening. So here we have the left nacelle, and so here we have our area where we're going to attach the engine plate. So here's the engine plate. Now the engine plate has been cleaned up, the key's been removed. Oops. There's a little bit of an edge there. I mean, for this there's not much point taking that super smooth because it's only going to be covered. That doesn't matter there because that's only going to go up against the side of something. So yeah, so that's a part. So that is ready to mount. And if we look at the mounting, we can see that that's clear of detritus and obstructions, and this is a key attachment point here. And the clever thing, as I said, is that part sits in there like so, and we've covered that unsightly attachment point. Good design. Now, poor production quality though. This doesn't fit properly or against this. So what's going on? You can see that the lip of this clearly stands above the corresponding edge on the nacelle, and then the actual mounting groove, or almost mounting rail for the medium jet exhaust, is standing almost a millimetre proud of where it should be. Alternatively, this is a millimetre lower than where it should be, and the consequences of this are as follows. So we get some focus, and we take the small jet exhaust, pushes on like so. When we take the medium jet exhaust and attach it, it doesn't attach properly. In two areas. Firstly, we've got a wobbly fit. There's no proper firm attachment there. I mean, that should be level, and when you do that, you get a big old gap there, and then this doesn't line up here. How do I know that doesn't line up? Well, if we then take the large jet engine, jet exhaust, we can see how this is all smoothly aligned. And if we go back to the medium one, we can see that the detail is displaced, and it's not right. It shouldn't be like that. And it also then means when you put this fella on, that they're kind of kissing each other, which you shouldn't really be doing. These two should be quite snugly together, and then there should be a little bit of a gap separating those from that guy. So yeah, so not, and it's the same on both sides if I can just swing it around. So yeah, that doesn't fit properly, and so there's one of two things are wrong here. Actually, one of a fault that's happening here, and this is actually what leads me to have a view of what the cause is here. We can see that this part doesn't fit properly against a nacelle, and there's a kind of like an overhang there of around 0.5 millimetre, maybe slightly more, probably about 0.5 millimetre. So what do I think is going on? Well, what I think is going on is I actually think these parts are pretty fine. This engine plate's fine. The problem is with the nacelle. And I think what's happened is the nacelle is distorted and it's been sucked in the production process, and you can see that running down there. You can see we've got a furrow where that's going like that, and that should be square and true. Again here, this should be square and true, and it's not. So what I think they've done is this particular part has been cast using a vacuum evacuation technique, an overpressure technique. So they this is going to be surrounded in by a pressure chamber, and they're going to this is going to be put under pressure, I think, can't be certain, to push all the air bubbles out. I suppose you could create a vacuum at this end to suck it out, but whatever's happened, it's sucked the mould in, and it's created this distortion running all the way down. And I didn't twig on this to start with, and it's only when I got to this fairly advanced stage of construction that I've found it. And having taken all these parts off the keys, cleaned them up, and then got to fitting, I was actually ready to start gluing this together, and so I've had to stop. And the other nacelle is just the same, so here we have it, and I'm going to take all the other parts, so the opposite set of parts. So again, we have the engine plate, and I fitted that, and there we have it again, about a 1 millimetre overhang. Doesn't line up properly. And then if I mount the jet exhaust onto that, we can observe, there you go, exactly the same problem again, and all the details wrong and off. Got the same gap there on the large engine, and there you go, you've got the same gap there. Now I did think, because I got so far with the rest of this kit, and I kind of dealt with the big challenge of getting the hull together. I thought, well, how can I sort of remedy this? But no, it doesn't really remedy this one, because if you cut this plate down, you're going to lose some detail. You can't build this up, because you'd have to build the whole thing up, and you'd have to rebuild this part of the jet exhaust. So you can't go up, you can't go down. There's nothing really, you haven't got any space to do with this engine. I suppose you could, I guess if you start cutting this engine away to drop it down, you might get it stuck on there. It's then not going to be able to go past this hemispherical limiting lip. So you can't do it that way either. So there really is no way to go with that. If you want to get a proper fit and alignment with that part, there's no way to go to remedy that. It is a production fault. And in all fairness, I'm going to be very fair and impartial to the quality control person who checked this, who I called me. This is not their fault either. There's no way a quality control person can identify faults of this nature. The responsibility for getting this right sits with the production and manufacturing team. The quality control people, they can't spot details like this, particularly on a kit where you have parts attached to keys, and it's just simply not possible to push fit these while they're packing. And let's be honest, it's not cost effective either. It would, you would increase the cost of the kit massively if people had to sort of push fit these, because it's just so labour intensive. It's something that has to be controlled at the point of manufacture. So yes, so that's what I've come across with my Coronis kit. I'm very disappointed. This is pretty much, this was bought on the day of release, general release, not the early release ones, the weekend, but this was bought on the day of the release. I know from the quality control slip this was manufactured in late December. It's been sat waiting, so there's everything there tells me that this was made off an early mould, and despite the fact this is one of the first models in the production run for the Coronis, it still has some very significant faults, and this simply should never have got to the point of release. So what am I doing? Right, well, I'm taking the nacelles and the engines only. There's no way I'm letting ForgeWorld get their hands on this thing, having spent nearly 12 hours working on that. I'm taking these down to ForgeWorld tomorrow. I'm going to drop them off, and we will see what they can do to sort that out. So there you have it, the sorry tale of the condition of the booms and the jet exhaust assemblies on my Coronis grav carrier. Been out with the cheese that's today on a day trip, and I was passing Nottingham, so I've dropped the parts in. So the 2 booms, the 6 jet exhausts and 2 engine plates. I've dropped them into the ForgeWorld team for them to look at it. Now, while I was doing that, I was in the ForgeWorld store, and I noticed that they had an assembled Coronis grav carrier on display that they were, was there for customers to look at. And I asked them if I could have a look at it, and they duly obliged. And, I wanted to see what the fit and finish was like. And so 2 things I saw from that. Firstly, there were no enormous gaps on the underside of this hull at the front. There was, you could tell there was a joint, and it's a resin kit, so there was a bit of filling to do, but there was no 1mm wide gap here. So that was clearly much better cast on their example, and all this nonsense here wasn't present either. So it then turns out, the other thing is the jet exhaust assemblies. So you remember the one I had, so the one that I pointed out the particular problem was the medium jet exhaust, but there was another issue of a large jet exhaust. These all fitted together spot on their example. So straight away I knew that they can make kits that fit together properly. So I got into conversation with them about this, and it turns out that the example that they're showing to their customers is actually manufactured off a Submaster mould. Now, I don't know if you've not watched my video on the Triaros, my farewell to the Triaros. Just to summarise briefly, there's a 3-stage process to make a mould for a production kit. They have a master, which is taken off the original sculpt, a submaster, and then a production mould. So what they'd done with their store example is they'd actually taken it off a submaster, so it's closer to the original than the actual models that are being shipped to customers, which I thought was very interesting, particularly given the much better apparent quality. So straight away I knew that my suspicions and unhappiness with my Coronis and the fit and finish were justified, because mine clearly didn't fit together properly in the way that their example did. So that was the first thing. You could also then say, well, so if I go into a ForgeWorld store and say, can I have a look at your Coronis? Say they will give you this model to look at, and it's been used as a sales tool. So is it right that they're using a model that is produced in a different way to what you're actually going to get as a customer? Interesting. Anyway, the other thing that came up while I was in discussion with the members of staff at the ForgeWorld store was the fact that I believe they have a whole variety of different people who make production molds. So they have a few people who do the master molds, but then they've got a whole host of people or teams who make the production molds. Now straight away I heard this and I thought, how on earth are you supposed to control the consistency if you've got different people doing manufacturing these production molds. I mean, and, why don't you have a small group of people with the right skills producing several sets of production molds, as opposed to loads of people producing the same number of molds? Because it's quite a human process. This isn't exactly an exact science, and there's a lot of, I imagine, with producing molds on these things, there's a lot of individual skill and experience are required for successful execution. So the fact that he intimated to have a whole host of people making production molds as opposed to a small number, concerns me, and it comes back to a point that I made in my video Farewell to Triaros, around how do they control the consistency of the production molds. And what I heard is exactly what I didn't want to hear in terms of that. So anyway, the parts are now with Forge World, and we will see where this leads us. I'm hoping for a much better resolution than I got with the Triaros. If I don't get a better resolution than I got with the Triaros, I think I will be entering into correspondence with the senior management at Forge World, because to get a kit at release with these issues, it isn't acceptable. It's as simple as that. Let's not beat around the bush here. And given that this model was, as far as I can tell, produced off the first set of an early production model off of brand new molds, and it's still got significant problems, they've got to get a handle on this. Anyway, so there you go. My spleen is now vented. So let me know what you think. Thank you very much for listening. I'll speak to you next time, and goodbye.